At Thanksgiving, my son-in-law said he didn't need another mouth to feed. I grabbed my wallet and paid the entire bill with a smile. A week later, he got a call, and the whole family got up from the table, and his world falls apart. The scent of roasting turkey, sage stuffing, and my granddaughter Emily's overly sweet cranberry sauce usually filled my small but cozy home with a warmth that went beyond the culinary. For as long as I could remember, Thanksgiving had been my favorite holiday, a time for family, for gratitude, for the comfortable chaos of loved ones gathered under one roof. We'd always found a way to be together, even in the leanest of years. This year, however, the aroma felt tainted. It was a sensory betrayal, a promise of warmth that the reality of the day could not deliver. My son David had passed some years ago, leaving a void that was never truly filled. But I had always cherished the presence of his wife Carol and my sweet Emily. Now Carol had her second husband Mark in tow. Mark. The name felt like a brand on my heart, a constant, abrasive reminder of a life Carol had built after David, a life that seemed to have little room for his own mother. Mark had never been particularly fond of me. I had seen it from the beginning, a subtle disdain in his eyes that he tried and failed to mask. Oh, he was civil enough in public, offering a perfunctory hug at the start of gatherings and a mumbled goodbye at the end. But his eyes, they held a glint of impatience, a subtle dismissal that spoke volumes. He saw me, I knew, as a relic, a kindly but ultimately useless old woman who was probably a drain on Carol's resources. Resources that he, in his self-proclaimed financial acumen, felt he could manage far better. For years I had ignored it, excused it, convincing myself it was just his personality. I'd done my best to be a good sport, a quiet and appreciative guest in what was, for all intents and purposes, a family I no longer fully belonged to. But this year, the subtle barbs had been sharper, the dismissals more blatant. Perhaps it was the way I'd gently suggested that Emily might like to learn how to make my mother's apple pie recipe, a recipe Carol had always claimed she was too busy for. Or maybe it was when I'd reminisced about David's childhood Christmases, a topic that always seemed to cast a shadow over Mark's meticulously curated, materialistic present. Whatever the reason, the atmosphere felt brittle, stretched thin like the skin on a Thanksgiving balloon about to pop. The air was thick with a tension that only I seemed to feel. We were at the local diner, a tradition we'd started a few years back after my arthritis made standing over a hot stove for hours a less appealing prospect. It wasn't the same as home, but it was easier, and I still enjoyed the company, or at least I used to. The meal had progressed in its usual manner, Emily chattering about school, her innocent voice a sweet counterpoint to the underlying discord, Carol offering updates on her real estate business, always with a subtle emphasis on her successes, the number of houses sold, the commissions earned, and Mark. Well, Mark mostly held court. He regaled us with tales of his latest business ventures, his voice booming just a little too loudly for the cozy atmosphere of the diner, as if to ensure everyone within a 50-foot radius knew of his perceived importance. Then came the moment. The bill arrived, presented discreetly to Mark, as he was always the one to theatrically pull out his wallet, a gesture meant to convey his role as the family's sole provider. He glanced at the total, a frown creasing his brow as he saw the figure. He sighed, a long, dramatic exhalation that drew everyone's attention. "You know," he began, his gaze sweeping over the four of us, settling pointedly on me. "With the way things are going. Inflation, you know. Every little bit counts. Sometimes," he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if sharing some profound financial truth, "sometimes you have to make tough decisions. Realize who the priorities are. And frankly," he said, his eyes locking onto mine with a disconcerting directness that felt like a punch to the gut, "frankly, we don't really need another mouth to feed, do we, Eleanor?" Carol's smile faltered, her eyes darting nervously between Mark and me, a flicker of shame crossing her face before she quickly looked away. My own heart gave a painful lurch. Another mouth to feed. At 78 years old, after decades of raising a family, of scrimping and saving, of always putting others first, I was now considered excess baggage, a burden, an unnecessary expense. A wave of humiliation washed over me, hot and stinging. My hands trembled slightly in my lap, and for a fleeting moment, I wanted to disappear, to become invisible, to rewind time and stay home, alone with my memories of a family that had once been whole. But then, something shifted within me. The hurt, sharp as it was, began to solidify into something else, something firmer, something resolute. Decades of biting my tongue, of overlooking subtle slights for the sake of family harmony, had come to an end. The old Eleanor, the one who always tried to smooth things over and avoid confrontation, was gone. In her place was someone different. Someone who had been underestimated for far too long. I reached into my purse, my movements deliberate, my gaze steady, refusing to be cowed by his cruelty. I pulled out my wallet, a worn leather one that had seen me through countless grocery runs and family vacations. I opened it, revealing a thick wad of bills, the proceeds from a small inheritance I had recently received, money I had intended to use for some long overdue home repairs. With a smile that I hoped looked serene rather than strained, I said, my voice calm and even, "Nonsense, Mark. It's Thanksgiving. Let me take care of this." And before anyone could object, I reached for the bill and placed more than enough cash on the table to cover the entire meal, plus a generous tip for our kind waitress, who had been a silent witness to the entire uncomfortable exchange. Mark's face registered a flicker of surprise, quickly replaced by a tight, almost imperceptible frown, as if he was annoyed that his attempt at a power play had been thwarted. Carol's eyes widened, a mixture of shock and perhaps a hint of relief in their depths. Emily, bless her sweet soul, reached over and squeezed my hand under the table, a small gesture of love and support that meant more to me than she would ever know. The rest of the meal passed in a strained silence. Mark's earlier boisterousness had vanished, replaced by a sullen quiet. He picked at his food, his expression sour. Carol made a few attempts at polite conversation, but the awkwardness hung heavy in the air. As we left the diner, Mark mumbled a curt, "Thank you," without looking at me. Carol offered a quick, stiff hug, her eyes filled with an unreadable emotion. Emily hugged me tightly, whispering, "Love you, Nana." Another mouth to feed. The phrase echoed with a cruelty that belied its casual delivery. That was it. That was the breaking point. The quiet resolve that had sparked within me now burned with a steady, determined flame. I thought about my late husband, Thomas. He had been a shrewd businessman, quiet and unassuming, but with a keen eye for detail and a knack for strategic thinking. I had learned a thing or two from him over the years, lessons I had tucked away, perhaps subconsciously waiting for the right moment. That moment had arrived. The inheritance Mark had so clearly resented me having was the key. It wasn't a vast fortune, but it was enough. Enough to give me options, enough to make them notice me. Over the next few days, I started making phone calls, discreetly, quietly, to people I hadn't spoken to in years, to professionals who understood the intricacies of finance and law. I dusted off old documents, reread forgotten letters, and pieced together information that had been lying dormant for years. The hurt from Thanksgiving was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it was now accompanied by a sense of purpose, a quiet thrill of anticipation. Mark and Carol, meanwhile, seemed to have moved on, their lives continuing in its usual self-absorbed rhythm. They probably assumed I would simply absorb the slight, as I always had. They couldn't have been more wrong. 1 week after Thanksgiving, my phone rang. It was Carol. Her voice was strained, tight with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "Mom," she said, her usual breezy tone absent. "Mark just got a call from the bank." My grip tightened on the phone. This was it. The first domino. "Yes?" I asked, my voice calm, betraying none of the nervous energy thrumming beneath the surface. They said something about his accounts being frozen." Her voice cracked slightly. Something about a lien? A small, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips. "Oh dear," I said, feigning concern. "How dreadful." They had no idea what was coming. They had no idea that the quiet, unassuming old woman they considered just another mouth to feed had just set in motion a series of events that would unravel their carefully constructed world. And as I sat there, a sense of quiet satisfaction began to bloom, a feeling I hadn't experienced in a very long time. The world as they knew it was indeed about to crumble. The following hours crawled by with an agonizing slowness that felt both suffocating and deeply satisfying. I busied myself with small, mundane tasks around the house, trying to appear as normal as possible should Carol call again. I watered my African violets, each one a miniature monument to life and persistence. I dusted the antique clock on the mantelpiece, its steady ticking a calm counterpoint to the nervous energy thrumming beneath my skin. I even attempted to read a book, though my eyes kept drifting to the silent telephone, a black portal to the chaos I had set in motion. Every time it chirped with a notification, my heart would leap, only to sink again if it wasn't Carol. The anticipation was a strange mix of nervousness and a grim, resolute satisfaction, like a gardener watching for the first sprout after meticulously preparing the soil. Finally, the phone rang. It was Carol. Her voice was a strained whisper, barely audible above what sounded like shouting in the background, a cacophony of Mark's frustrated rage. "Mom," she gasped. This is unbelievable." The performance was a necessary part of the plan. I couldn't appear too eager, too knowing. It's the house," she said, her voice trembling, the words tumbling out in a rush. "The bank says there's a lien on our house, a very large one." "I don't understand." "He's yelling at everyone. They just keep saying it's related to some old business debt of his, something from before we were married." How very interesting. Mark had always presented himself as a picture of financial stability, a shrewd investor with a flawless business history. It seemed the reality was perhaps a little less polished than the narrative he'd so carefully constructed. He had, in his arrogance, assumed that no one would ever bother to look beneath the surface. "That sounds very stressful," I said sympathetically, my voice dripping with the sort of detached concern one might offer a stranger. "Is there anything I can do?" "There's nothing anyone can do. They've frozen several of his accounts, too. We can't access anything. We can't even pay our bills." "That's quite a predicament. The house, our savings, everything." I could almost hear Carol's mind struggling to process my words, to connect my seemingly innocuous statement with the catastrophic news she had just delivered. She was finally beginning to put the pieces together. What do you mean by that?" she asked slowly, her voice laced with suspicion, the desperation momentarily replaced by a sharp, probing edge. "Oh, nothing, dear," I said airily. "Just a thought. Perhaps all that financial acumen Mark boasts about will finally come in handy. After all," I added, a hint of steel entering my tone, "he's the one who makes all the tough decisions." That comment at Thanksgiving, and then this happens a week later. It can't be a coincidence. "Carol, darling, what could I possibly have to do with Mark's business affairs? I'm just an old woman." "You paid the bill with it, did you? Did you use it to go after him?" I didn't deny it, didn't confirm it. I simply let her fill in the blanks with her own fear and guilt. "Coincidence is a funny thing, isn't it?" I said, deliberately vague. "Sometimes life has a way of balancing things out. If you know something, if you had anything to do with this, you have to tell me. We're a family. It involves respect, consideration, not making someone feel like a burden, like an unwanted expense. It involves seeing a person, not a problem." Finally, Carol hung up without another word. The sound of the dial tone, a final cold period on the end of our conversation. I sat back in my chair, a wave of exhaustion washing over me, but beneath it, a quiet sense of satisfaction, of a job well done. The initial shockwave had hit. Mark's carefully constructed facade of financial success was crumbling, and Carol, who had stood by him in his arrogance, was caught in the debris. Over the next few days, the situation escalated rapidly. Carol called several more times, her tone alternating between frantic pleas for help and furious accusations. Mark, when he finally deigned to speak to me, was openly hostile, his voice filled with a rage he barely managed to contain. He demanded to know what I had done, accusing me of spitefulness and vindictiveness, unable to comprehend that his own actions had set this chain of events in motion. "Mark," I said calmly during one particularly heated phone call, "I haven't done anything. You seem to be having some financial difficulties. I suggest you focus on resolving those. You're trying to ruin us. My small inheritance simply brought your past to light. And as you so famously said, sometimes you have to make tough decisions. This, it seems, was one of them. Through my network of discreet inquiries, I learned more about the old business debt. It turned out Mark had been less than truthful about his past. There was a significant loan he had taken out years ago for a failed venture, a loan he had somehow managed to keep hidden from Carol. My seemingly innocent questions to a bank manager about investing my inheritance had, as I had hoped, raised red flags about Mark's outstanding loans, prompting a review of his financial situation. The bank, seeing a risk to their own interests, had moved swiftly to protect themselves. My actions had been simple, yet effective. I had used my newfound financial independence to subtly nudge the forces of karma in the right direction. Mark's own dishonesty and financial mismanagement had been his undoing. I had simply provided the catalyst. As the days turned into weeks, the fallout continued. The house was indeed in jeopardy. Mark's credit was ruined. His business ventures, many of which relied on a carefully cultivated image of success, began to falter. The whispers started, the rumors spread. The man who had once held court at family gatherings boasting of his achievements was now a pariah, his arrogance replaced by a desperate scramble to salvage what he could. Carol, caught in the middle, grew increasingly resentful, her phone calls becoming less frequent, her tone colder. I knew our relationship would likely never be the same, but a part of me felt a weary acceptance. I had tried for years to bridge the gap, to be the loving mother-in-law, but her loyalty had always ultimately lain with Mark, with his perceived success and the lifestyle he provided. My small but meaningful act had not just exposed his flaws, but hers as well. I found a quiet satisfaction in my solitude. My home felt peaceful now, the air no longer thick with unspoken resentments. Emily still visited, her innocent presence a balm to my soul. We baked cookies, read stories, and talked about her day. In her eyes, I was still just Nana, and that was enough. The world I had inhabited with them had indeed shifted, and in its crumbling, a new, more authentic world was taking its place. A world where I was no longer just another mouth to feed, but a woman who had reclaimed her dignity, her independence, and her quiet power. The storm had passed, and a fragile but promising new dawn was breaking. The silence from Carol and Mark became a heavy, almost palpable thing. The initial flurry of frantic, angry phone calls had ceased, replaced by a cold, echoing void. Weeks turned into months, marked only by Emily's regular visits and the quiet rhythm of my own days. I knew intellectually that they were likely consumed by their own crisis, drowning in a sea of their own making. But a small, stubborn part of me, the part that had once craved their approval and longed for a sense of family, felt a pang of something akin to, not sadness exactly, but perhaps a weary resignation. The chapter of my life that had been so tightly intertwined with theirs was finally and irrevocably closing. Emily, bless her heart, remained the bright spot, a lifeline of pure, uncomplicated love. During her visits, she provided glimpses into their unraveling world, though filtered through the innocent and often confused lens of a child. She mentioned that they had sold their big house and moved into a smaller apartment. Mark, she said, no longer drove his fancy car. It had been repossessed. Her mother seemed always tired and sometimes cried. I listened patiently, offering words of comfort to Emily without ever delving into the specifics of her parents' situation. It wasn't my place to poison her young mind against them, even if their actions had been reprehensible towards me. I simply held her hand, baked her favorite cookies, and provided a safe, peaceful harbor from the storm that raged in their home. My own life, in contrast, had settled into a comfortable, almost serene routine. The inheritance, carefully managed with the help of a trusted financial advisor, provided a sense of security and independence I hadn't felt in years. I made the long overdue repairs to my home, replacing the leaky roof and updating the aging kitchen. These were small things, perhaps, but they brought a sense of renewed comfort and ownership to my space. I spent more time in my garden, nurturing the roses and hydrangeas that had always brought me joy, their vibrant life a powerful contrast to the emotional barrenness I had recently escaped. I reconnected with old friends, women I had lost touch with during the years I had focused so much on a family that had taken me for granted. We shared lunches, went to the occasional movie, and reminisced about the past, a past that felt simpler, more honest. I even joined a book club at the local library, discovering new authors and engaging in stimulating discussions that reminded me of a part of myself I had long neglected. One crisp autumn afternoon, Emily arrived for her usual visit, her brow slightly furrowed with a seriousness that seemed a size too big for her face. "Nana," she said hesitantly, "Mom wants to know if you would be willing to talk to Dad." "Talk to him about what, sweetheart?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral, but every fiber of my being was on high alert. He says he made some mistakes," Emily mumbled, looking down at her hands, twisting a loose thread on the porch swing. "And he wants to apologize." The thought was almost comical. He had never struck me as the apologetic type. His pride was a fortress, impenetrable and unyielding. "And your mother?" I asked. "Does she want me to talk to him too?" "Really hard right now. And maybe if you talk to him—" Her voice trailed off, the unspoken hope hanging in the air like a desperate prayer. She saw me not as a tool for their salvation, but as a person with a kind heart who might be able to help. I considered it for a long moment, my thoughts a whirlwind of past hurts and present peace. Part of me wanted to refuse outright. He had been cruel and dismissive, and the consequences he was facing were largely of his own making. Why should I offer him any solace now? But then I looked at Emily's earnest face, her innocent desire for some semblance of peace in her family, and I thought about Carol, my late son's wife, a woman I had once cared for deeply who was now caught in the crossfire of a man's greed and pride. "All right, sweetheart," I said finally. "Tell your mother that I will talk to him. But he needs to call me himself. I won't chase after him." "Thank you, Nana," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. It took another week before Mark finally called. His voice, usually booming with self-assurance, was subdued, almost hesitant, the sound of a man humbled by his circumstances. "Eleanor," he said, his tone flat, stripped of its usual arrogance. "Mark," I replied, keeping my own voice cool and measured. There was a long silence, filled only with the faint static of the phone line. Finally, he spoke again, his words delivered with a forced humility. Emily said you'd be willing to talk. About what happened, about what I said at Thanksgiving. I was out of line. What I said was hurtful and disrespectful. There's no excuse for it. Difficult," he continued, his voice gaining a slight edge of self-pity. "The business, the house, everything. I was stressed and I took it out on you. That wasn't right. Your words made me feel unwelcome, like a burden to my own family, like a problem to be solved. And I'm sorry, truly sorry. I didn't mean it the way it came out." But there was a weariness in his voice that sounded genuine. The sound of a man who had faced the consequences of his actions and had been utterly defeated by them. "The consequences of your actions have been significant, Mark," I said, stating a simple fact. "You've lost your home, your financial security. You had something to do with that, didn't you? Your past financial dealings came to light. The bank acted accordingly." I could feel his resentment simmering beneath the surface of his forced apology, but it was now tempered by a cold fear. He was no longer the arrogant man who had held court at the diner. He was a man who was desperate, clinging to a broken past. "So what now?" he asked finally, his voice resigned. "What do you want from me?" "I simply wanted you to understand the impact of your words and actions. I wanted you to acknowledge the hurt you caused. I wanted you to see me not as a burden but as a person. Your relationship with Carol and Emily is between the three of you. But as far as I'm concerned, I've said what needed to be said. The score is settled. Help us," he asked, a flicker of naked desperation in his voice. I paused, the irony of his question a bitter pill in my mouth. He had dismissed me as a financial burden, and now he was asking for my help. "Help you how, Mark? You have money now. We're struggling." I saved, and I was fortunate to receive an inheritance. That money is for my future, for my peace of mind. "Family shows respect," I countered, my voice firm. "Family doesn't make you feel like just another mouth to feed." His grasp for a quick fix had been met with the cold, hard truth of his own words. "I understand," he said finally, his voice flat with defeat. "I hope you do," I said. "Goodbye, Mark." There was no triumphant satisfaction, no sense of vindication. Just a quiet sadness for the brokenness of it all. I hadn't sought to ruin him, but his own actions, amplified by a gentle nudge, had led to his downfall. He had brought his world crumbling down on his own head, and my role had been simply to stand out of the way. That evening Emily called, her voice full of questions. I explained that I had spoken to her father, that he had apologized, and that he was struggling. I didn't elaborate on the details, wanting to shield her from the complexities and the lingering bitterness. She deserved to hold on to her innocence for as long as she could. Life continued its steady course. I maintained a polite but distant relationship with Carol and Mark, primarily through Emily. There were no more condescending remarks or dismissive glances directed my way. They treated me with a newfound, albeit somewhat strained, respect. The justice I had inadvertently brought about hadn't filled me with the joy I might have expected. Instead, it had left a void, a reminder of the fragility of family and the lasting damage that words and actions can inflict. But there was also a sense of closure, a feeling that I had stood up for myself and reclaimed my dignity. And in the quiet moments, tending to my garden or reading a good book, I found a deeper, more authentic peace than I had known in a long time. The crumbling of their world had, in a strange way, allowed me to rebuild my own, on a foundation of self-respect and independence. Time, as it always does, continued its relentless march, a silent and indifferent observer of human folly and triumph. The seasons turned, painting the familiar landscape of my neighborhood in new hues, from the vibrant greens of spring to the fiery reds of autumn. My garden flourished, a vibrant testament to the quiet joy I found in nurturing life. I watched as my roses bloomed and my hydrangeas changed color, each one a powerful symbol of growth and transformation. My book club continued to expand my horizons, introducing me to worlds beyond my own. and my friendships deepened, offering a comforting tapestry of shared experiences and unwavering support. I had built a new life, one on my own terms, and I was thriving. Carol and Mark remained a peripheral presence in my life, their interactions with me polite but reserved, almost wary. The initial bitterness and resentment had softened over time, but the emotional distance remained palpable. They were like characters in a play I had once been a part of, now seen from a safe and comfortable distance. Emily, however, continued to be a constant source of light. She was no longer the confused little girl who had witnessed her father's cruelty. She was growing into a thoughtful and compassionate young woman, navigating the complexities of her parents' strained relationship with a maturity beyond her years. Our bond remained strong, a testament to the enduring power of love and connection across generations. One sunny afternoon, Emily came to visit, a thoughtful expression on her face that reminded me so much of my late son, David. She settled onto the porch swing beside me, a place that held so many memories of quiet conversations and shared laughter. "Nana," she said hesitantly, "Mom and Dad are thinking about moving." "Where to?" "They wanted me to tell you, but I wanted to be the one to say goodbye. Their physical distance might finally ease the awkwardness that still lingered between us, allowing the wounds to fully heal without the constant reminder of their presence." But another part, the Nana in me, felt a pang of sadness at the thought of Emily moving so far away. She was the last tie to the family I had once known, and the thought of her being so far away was a heavy one. When would this be happening? I asked gently, my focus entirely on her. "Soon," she said. "If Dad gets the final offer, they wanted me to talk to you about it, but they hadn't dared to ask directly since Mark's ill-fated attempt, and I had no intention of offering. My money was for my future, for my peace of mind, not for theirs." "And how do you feel about it, sweetheart?" I asked Emily, turning my attention to her, a single tear tracing a path down my cheek. "What do you want?" "I don't know, Nana. I'll miss you, but maybe it will be better for them. They've been so unhappy for so long." She was so perceptive, so attuned to the underlying tensions in her family. She had seen the truth of their unhappiness and was willing to sacrifice her own comfort for their well-being. Over the next few weeks, the move became a reality. Mark received the job offer and the logistics of packing and relocating began. Carol called me a few times, her tone businesslike, updating me on their progress. There was no warmth, no hint of the shared history we once had. It was as if the events of the past year had erected an invisible wall between us, one that neither of us seemed willing or able to dismantle. The day before they were scheduled to leave, Emily came to say goodbye. We sat on the porch swing again, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the lawn. We talked about school, about her friends, about all the things she would miss. I promised to visit her as often as I could, and we made plans for video calls and sending letters, a modern twist on a timeless connection. As she was getting ready to leave, she turned back, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and something else, a flicker of understanding, a quiet strength that had been forged in the fire of her parents' mistakes.
"Nana," she said softly, "I know things were hard with Mom and Dad
And I understand why you were upset." "Oh, sweetheart," I whispered. "I just wanted everyone to be happy and to treat each other with kindness. That's all I ever wanted. But I will be, I promise." It was a confirmation that she understood, that she saw the truth of what had happened and that she would not repeat their mistakes. The next morning, I stood on my porch and watched as their car pulled away, disappearing down the street. A chapter of my life had closed, one marked by both pain and a hard-won sense of liberation. The physical distance created by their move felt symbolic, a further separation from the negativity that had overshadowed our family gatherings. Life settled back into its peaceful rhythm. I continued to enjoy my garden, my friends, and my books. Emily and I kept in touch, our bond unbroken by the miles. And slowly, gradually, I began to feel a sense of lightness I hadn't experienced in years. The weight of resentment and the need for validation from those who had not valued me had lifted. One afternoon, while sorting through some old papers, I came across a photograph of David, my late son, holding a young Emily in his arms, both of them beaming. A wave of bittersweet nostalgia washed over me. He would have been so proud of the woman Emily was becoming, so saddened by the rift that had formed within the family. I realized then that my actions hadn't been about revenge, but about protecting my own well-being, about reclaiming the respect I deserved. David would have understood that. He wouldn't have wanted me to be treated with such callousness. He would have been on my side, As the years passed, Carol and Mark remained in the distance, their lives unfolding separately from mine. There were occasional holiday cards, brief, impersonal messages. Emily, however, remained a constant in my life, visiting when she could, her love and support unwavering. Looking back, I wouldn't say I regretted my actions. They had been necessary, a turning point that had allowed me to move forward with my life on my own terms. The justice that had been served wasn't the sweet taste of revenge, but the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I had stood up for myself, that I had refused to be diminished. And in the peaceful solitude of my home, surrounded by the beauty of my garden and the warmth of cherished memories, I found a profound and lasting sense of peace. The Thanksgiving that had started with a hurtful remark had ultimately led to a profound shift, not just in their world, but in mine. I was no longer just another mouth to feed. I was Eleanor, a woman who had weathered the storms of life and emerged stronger, more resilient, and finally, truly at peace. The world might have crumbled for some, but for me, it had opened up to a new chapter, one filled with self-respect, independence, and the enduring love of my granddaughter. The years that followed the move were a gentle glide, a serene passage of time that added subtle etchings to my face and deepened the lines of wisdom around my eyes. My home, once a stage for unspoken resentments and manufactured dramas, had become a true sanctuary. My garden remained my greatest solace, a riot of color and fragrance that mirrored the quiet joy in my heart. Each rose I tended, each hydrangea I watched change color, was a powerful testament to the new life I had built. My book club continued to expand my horizons, and my friendships provided a comforting tapestry of shared experiences and unwavering support. I was not alone. I was simply at peace, on my own terms. Emily blossomed into a remarkable young woman, her spirit undiminished by the quiet unhappiness she had witnessed at home. She pursued her passion for art, her talent evident in the vibrant canvases she often shared with me. She would call me on video, her face beaming as she showed me a new painting, and we would talk for hours, sharing our thoughts and dreams. She remained a steadfast presence in my life, a source of immense happiness and the last unbroken link to my late son, David. Our bond deepened with each passing year, a testament to the fact that true family isn't about proximity, but about connection. Carol and Mark remained in their distant state, their contact sporadic and impersonal. Occasionally, Emily would share snippets of their lives, a change in job, a minor health scare. But the emotional distance remained palpable. There were no heartfelt conversations, no attempts to bridge the gap that had formed. It seemed that the events of that Thanksgiving and their aftermath had created a permanent chasm, a silent, unspoken acknowledgement of a line that had been crossed. Mark's world had indeed crumbled, and while it had caused collateral damage, the new foundation they were building was not on the solid ground of respect and honesty, but on a strained and distant politeness. One spring morning, the phone rang and Emily's voice, carrying a note of pure excitement, filled my kitchen. "Nana," she said, "I have some news. I'm getting married. Tell me everything." I listened intently, tears of joy streaming down my face, so incredibly happy that she was building a life filled with the love and respect she deserved. As we talked about the wedding plans, Emily paused, a hint of hesitation in her voice. "Nana," she said softly, "Mom and Dad, they're going to be there, of course, and, well, I was hoping you would come too." The thought of being in the same space as Carol and Mark after all these years stirred a faint unease. But then I thought of Emily's hopeful face, her desire to have all the important people in her life present on her special day, and my heart melted. This wasn't about them, this was about her. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, my voice filled with genuine warmth. I wouldn't miss it for the world. I watched her exchange vows with her groom, my heart overflowing with love and pride. The love between them was pure and unconditional, a stark contrast to the transactional nature of the love I had seen in my own family. Carol and Mark were there, sitting a few rows behind me, a silent, distant presence. We exchanged polite nods, a brief acknowledgement of our shared history through Emily. There was no animosity, but also no real warmth. The years had smoothed some of the sharp edges, but the underlying distance remained. During the reception, Emily came over to me, her eyes sparkling with happiness. "Nana," she said, taking my hand, "I wanted to thank you for being here. It means so much to me." Her expression was neutral, her eyes holding a hint of something I couldn't quite decipher, perhaps a flicker of regret, or a weary understanding. "Eleanor," she said, her voice quiet, "thank you for coming. Things haven't always been easy, have they? I had no desire to rehash the past, to revisit the hurt and resentment. The moment was about peace, not about conflict. Finally, Carol said, I hope you're doing well, Eleanor. I truly am. The events of the past had been a catalyst for growth and self-discovery. As I drove home that evening, the image of Emily's beaming face filled my thoughts. Her happiness was a testament to the enduring power of love and family. Even in the face of conflict and distance, life continued its gentle flow. I cherished my time with Emily and her growing family. I continued to find joy in my garden, my friends, and my quiet life. Looking back, I wouldn't say I regretted my actions. They had been necessary, a turning point that had allowed me to move forward with my life on my own terms. The justice that had been served wasn't the sweet taste of revenge, but the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I had stood up for myself, that I had refused to be diminished. And in the peaceful solitude of my home, surrounded by the beauty of my garden and the warmth of cherished memories, I found a profound and lasting sense of peace. The Thanksgiving that had started with a hurtful remark had ultimately led to a profound shift, not just in their world, but in mine. I was no longer just another mouth to feed. I was Eleanor, a woman who had weathered the storms of life and emerged stronger, more resilient, and finally, truly at peace. The world might have crumbled for some, but for me it had opened up to a new chapter, one filled with self-respect, independence, and the enduring love of my granddaughter.